He never called her Mom, but every Sunday for 10 years he brought her tea and crossword puzzles. What she left him after her death stunned not only him, but the niece who thought she deserved it all. The front porch of the old bungalow creaked beneath Jordan's weight, just as it had every Sunday for the past 11 years. He knocked twice, soft, familiar taps, and let himself in without waiting for an answer. The faint smell of lavender and peppermint tea greeted him like a memory. Somewhere in the back, a radio played classical music too low to hear the words, but enough to remind him he was home, or at least the closest thing he ever had to one. Jordan, now in his early 30s, had broad shoulders and gentle eyes that held both weariness and warmth. He carried a brown paper bag with pastries from the corner bakery, Mrs. Monroe's favorite, and a copy of the Sunday paper folded neatly under his arm. "Is that you, Jordan?" A voice called from the den. "Who else would it be?" he replied. His voice teasing but tender. He found her in her usual spot, curled into the corner of the floral armchair that had lost its shape decades ago. Evelyn Monroe, once a pillar of the local library, now sat with a blanket across her knees and a crossword puzzle book resting on her lap. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose like they always were when she was deep in thought. "You're 5 minutes late," she said, pretending to frown. "I'm 5 minutes better than never," he quipped, setting the pastries on the coffee table and stooping to kiss her on the forehead. Their Sundays were always the same, and that's how they liked it. AEI, shared pot of tea, a battle over crossword clues. She never admitted when he was right, and sometimes, if the sun was out, they would sit in the garden she had spent years nurturing. Now she let him tend it. Her hands trembled too much. Evelyn had taken Jordan in when he was 14. Skinny, guarded, and quiet. He had already been through 4 homes by then, each one colder than the last. But Evelyn was different. She didn't try to be a replacement mother. She didn't ask too many questions. She simply made space for him room by room, until he realized he didn't need to sleep with his shoes on anymore. He never called her Mom. Not once. But the way he refilled her tea without asking, the way he trimmed her rose bushes just the way she liked, the way he still knocked on the door even though he had a key, those were the things that mattered. "You never did finish that book I gave you," she said, eyeing him over her glasses as he tucked into a raspberry Danish. "I did. Twice," Jordan replied, smirking. "You just forgot because you're old." She let out a soft chuckle, then reached for his hand. Her fingers were thin and papery, but they still squeezed with surprising strength. "You know, you were always the best chapter in my life," she said softly. Jordan looked down, suddenly quiet. "You say that every Sunday." "And it's true every Sunday," she replied. Outside, the garden shimmered under the afternoon light. The roses bloomed wildly. Some red, some white, all still standing, much like the bond between them, unspoken, imperfect, but fiercely alive. The smell of rain-soaked soil drifted through the garden window as Evelyn sipped her tea. She was staring out at the bird feeder, lost in thought, her crossword puzzle forgotten beside her. Jordan sat across from her, folding the Sunday paper, the rustle of newsprint breaking the quiet hum of the house. There was a comfort to their silence, built on years of showing up, of shared meals and unspoken understandings. But some silences stretched too far. Evelyn's voice, soft and slow, broke through. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" Jordan glanced up, surprised. She rarely spoke about those early days. He nodded. "Yeah, you gave me lasagna and told me to stop flinching every time someone spoke too loud." She chuckled, the sound dry and warm. "You didn't say a word for the first week." "I was sizing you up," he replied. "Didn't know if I'd last. You were skin and bones, too grown for your age, but still a child. I knew you'd been through more than you let on." Jordan looked away. His memories of those early foster homes were blurred, more feeling than image. The clatter of dishes, thrown in anger, the sting of indifference, the quiet panic of not knowing where you'd be next. He had come to Evelyn's house with a single duffel bag and a caseworker who looked tired of pretending to care. 4 homes in 2 years. No one. Kept him long, but Evelyn hadn't flinched. She was different. Not soft, but solid. Her rules were clear, her home organized to the point of obsession. Dinner at 6, homework before TV. Shoes off at the door. She wasn't overly affectionate, but she was consistent. That consistency built a kind of trust over time. Slow, like winter turning to spring. Jordan never asked why she never adopted him. At 14, he figured it was too late. No one wanted to legally claim a teenager who'd already learned how to disappear into walls. Once, he'd tried to ask, half-heartedly, between bites of cereal, but Evelyn had dismissed it with a wave. "Don't worry about titles, Jordan. You've got a room here, that's what matters." And he let it go. He never called her mom, but he stayed every Sunday, even after he aged out and got his own place. Now, all these years later, her voice carried something it never had before. Regret. "You know," she said, setting down her tea. "You were always mine, right?" Jordan blinked. Her eyes were watery, not with illness, but emotion, the kind she rarely showed. He smiled, unsure of what to do with the lump rising in his throat. "I know," he said, even though part of him didn't. He looked down at his hands. Big now, strong. Hands that had carried her groceries, painted her fences, pushed her wheelchair when she was too tired to walk. Hands that once trembled when she first touched his shoulder without warning. Evelyn reached across the table and laid, her palm over his. "I should have said it more." Jordan shook his head. "You didn't have to." But as the wind rustled the garden outside and the rain began to patter against the glass, he realized maybe he had needed to hear it more than he ever let on. The Sunday morning felt too quiet. Jordan pulled into the familiar driveway, the tires crunching over gravel still damp from a night of rain. The curtains in Evelyn's front window, usually drawn back by 8 a.m., were still closed. He noticed that first. He let himself in with the spare key she insisted he keep, in case I forget the tea kettle again. But there was no whistle from the stove this time. No half-filled crossword puzzle on the armrest of her favorite chair. No gentle, "You're late" greeting from the kitchen. "Evelyn?" he called gently at first. Then louder. The only response was the ticking of the grandfather clock and the soft rustle of wind brushing against the curtains. He found her still in bed, lying on her side. The book she'd been reading slipped from her hand. Her face was peaceful, lips parted just slightly. Like she'd drifted off mid-sentence and decided not to wake up again. Jordan didn't move for a long time. He sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, his hand gripping the blanket she'd crocheted years ago from scraps of yarn. Each square, a different color. He remembered teasing her that it looked like a quilt made by a toddler. She had laughed, said, "That's exactly the point. It's supposed to be imperfect." The hospice nurse arrived within the hour. They confirmed what he already knew. He called Clara, her only known blood relative, using the emergency contact Evelyn kept in her kitchen drawer, tucked behind the coupons and expired takeout menus. Clara arrived 2 days later. Smart pantsuit, muted lipstick, a rolling suitcase trailing behind her like a shadow. She was cordial but distant, offering practiced condolences and cool efficiency. "I'll help with the arrangements," she said quickly. She mentioned a local church. Jordan nodded. St. Mark's. She used to shelve books in their community library. They planned the service together, though Clara left most of the details to him. Floral arrangements, hymn selections, even the casket. She barely touched the photo albums he laid out on the table, only flipping through a few pages before closing them with a sigh. At the service, the pews filled steadily. Neighbors, former students, retired librarians, even a few of the neighborhood kids she used to tutor for free. Jordan sat in the front row, a crumpled handkerchief in his hand, trying to breathe through the heaviness in his chest. Clara approached the pulpit first. Her words were brief, kind, respectful, but impersonal. She was generous with her time. And she always sent birthday cards, a polite smile. She will be missed. Then it was Jordan's turn. He hadn't planned anything. No notes, no speech. But when he stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd, the words poured from somewhere deep inside. "She wasn't my mother," he began, his voice tight. "Not legally, not by blood. But she taught me what it meant to be safe, to be still, to be seen." His gaze drifted toward the casket, then back to the faces in front of him. "She made me do chores before I earned her trust, made me put books back in alphabetical order, made me believe that someone could stay, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to." A pause. "I never called her Mom, but I came back every Sunday for over 10 years, and she always opened the door." That's who she was. There were no loud sobs in the room, just the soft collective sound of people remembering. When he stepped down, even Clara had tears in her eyes, and though Jordan returned to an empty house that night, it didn't feel entirely hollow. Evelyn may have left quietly, but the life she touched still echoed in every room. The office of Merton and Hale was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Jordan arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in the same navy blazer he wore to Evelyn's funeral, the collar still stiff with starch. He didn't know what to expect. Maybe a small mention in her will, a worn copy of Little Women, or the aloe vera plant they always joked about being immortal. As he waited in the plush chair outside the lawyer's door, he rubbed his palms together nervously. Part of him felt like he didn't belong here. This was family business, legal affairs, legacy. Then Clara walked in. She wore a sleek black coat. Designer sunglasses perched atop her head, her expression unreadable. She gave Jordan a short nod, barely a greeting, before taking the seat across from him. Her crossed legs bounced slightly, betraying a tension beneath the polished surface. "Mr. Price?" A voice broke the silence. An older man stepped out from behind a wooden door, adjusting his spectacles. "We're ready for you both." They were led into a modest conference room, bookshelves lining the walls, a carafe of water on the table, and a single manila folder sitting ominously in the center. The lawyer, Mr. Ellison, cleared his throat and sat. "Thank you both for coming. I'll get right to it." Jordan folded his hands in his lap, expecting something brief and symbolic. "As per the last will and testament of Evelyn Monroe," Ellison began, flipping open the folder, "she requested that this reading be done in person and in full." Clara leaned back, arms folded. She didn't look concerned, just mildly inconvenienced. Mr. Ellison glanced at Jordan. "Mr. Price, you were specifically named in the document, which surprised me, but your name appears clearly." Jordan blinked. I didn't know. She had anything to leave behind." The lawyer nodded. "She didn't talk much about her finances, but she was careful, modest. What she had, she protected." He took a breath and began. "To my niece Clara Monroe, I leave the keepsake box from my living room cabinet, containing old photos, a collection of my favorite bookmarks, and a letter explaining why I've made the decisions I have, Clara's." Brows twitched ever so slightly. "To Jordan Price." Ellison paused, as if rereading to ensure he got it right. "I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the house and all its contents, the sum of $87,000 in savings, and all remaining personal property." Silence. Jordan's breath hitched. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Clara, meanwhile, sat frozen, jaw tight, lips slightly parted. Ellison continued, reading a brief handwritten note Evelyn had included. "To Jordan, you were never just passing through, you were home. I hope this gives you the roots you never had and the wings you deserve." The tension in the room thickened. Clara adjusted in her seat with deliberate calm, but the color had drained from her cheeks. "I see," she said softly, though her voice trembled just beneath the surface. "I didn't know," Jordan said quickly, almost defensively. She never mentioned anything like this." Ellison gave a sympathetic smile. "She didn't need to. Her actions said it all." Clara rose from her chair with the grace of someone taught to never make a scene in public. But her eyes, those betrayed eyes, shot a sharp glance at Jordan before she nodded once to the lawyer. "I'll collect the box later," she said curtly. "Good day." She walked out without another word. Jordan remained seated, the weight of Evelyn's legacy slowly sinking into his bones. He had come expecting nothing. Instead, he walked out with a life he never saw coming. The autumn air outside the law office was crisp, laced with the scent of dried leaves and faint car exhaust. Jordan stepped onto the sidewalk, the envelope still clutched in his hand. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted not just with paper but with the gravity of what had just occurred. Before he could even take a breath, Clara's voice sliced through the quiet. "So that's it?" she said, heels clacking as she caught up to him. "You just walk in and walk out with everything?" Jordan turned slowly. Her arms were crossed, eyes narrowed, her face stiff with something between betrayal and disbelief. "I didn't ask for anything," he replied softly, his voice even. "Exactly," she snapped. "You didn't ask. You just kept showing up week after week, planting yourself in her life like some project." Jordan blinked. "That's not what this was," Clara scoffed. "Please, Evelyn was 82. She was old, lonely, probably confused. And you? You were the only one she ever saw. You guilt-tripped her into thinking you were all she had." Jordan's jaw clenched, but he kept his composure. He looked her straight in the eyes. "Evelyn didn't owe me anything. Not a roof, not money, not even kindness. But she gave me all of it, without strings, without expectations." Clara laughed bitterly. "And now you've got her house, her savings, her legacy. Just like that." He nodded slowly. "Because I showed up." A pause hung between them. Jordan didn't flinch at her glare. He simply added, "You came for the funeral. I came every Sunday." Clara flinched at the quiet weight of those words, but her pride wouldn't let her soften. She took a step back, pulling her coat tighter around her. "You're not family," she said, voice sharp. "You never were." Jordan's shoulders tensed, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned, the lawyer's envelope still in hand, and walked down the sidewalk, each step heavier than the last. He wanted to shake it off, to remind himself of Evelyn's voice, her steady hands folding crossword pages, her patient smile when he failed to name a flower in her garden. But Clara's words clung to him like fog. "You're not family." They echoed louder than he expected. And though he knew deep down they weren't true, a quiet doubt crept into his chest, curling up beside the grief that still hadn't fully settled. He tightened his grip on the envelope and kept walking. The late afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor of Evelyn's study. The air still carried her scent, lavender with a trace of old paper and lemon polish. Jordan stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if stepping into a sacred space. A room she'd rarely let anyone enter. Stacks of books lined the walls, their spines softened by time. Her desk sat beneath a window that overlooked the garden, their garden. It was cluttered but neat in the way only librarians knew how to be. Jordan began sorting, unsure what he was looking for. Maybe just a way to feel close to her again. Then he saw it, tucked neatly into the drawer beneath the desk blotter, a large cream-colored envelope. On the front, in Evelyn's neat looping script, were the words, "For Jordan when I'm gone." His breath caught in his chest. He opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside were several smaller envelopes, each labeled with a year. 2006, 2007, 2008, all the way to 2023. One for each year since he first stepped into her home as a skinny, distrustful 14-year-old with clenched fists and eyes that flinched at kindness. He opened the first letter. "Dear Jordan, you probably still don't trust me. That's okay. I don't expect you to. But I want you to know I made your favorite dinner tonight, again, and I'll keep doing it until you say something. Or don't. Either way, I'm glad you're here." His vision blurred. He read another. "You called me Miss Evelyn today, and that was more than enough. You're learning to trust the house, if not me. I'll wait. I'll always wait." Letter after letter Evelyn had written to him through the years. Her feelings poured out onto paper she never had the courage to share. She wrote about his progress, his struggles, how she beamed when he passed his high school exams, how she cried behind closed doors when he nearly dropped out. And then came the explanation. The thing he'd never asked, but had always quietly wondered. You once asked in your eyes, if not with your mouth, why I never adopted you. The truth is, I tried. There was a legal hold tied to your biological family. Some uncle who contested everything just to make trouble. I fought for you, Jordan. I really did. But the system made it impossible. His hands tightened around the paper. But if a signature on a paper is what defines a parent, then the world is more foolish than I thought. You were mine in every way that mattered. The final letter was dated just months before she passed. You gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. Watching you grow into the man you are, steady, kind, and more loyal than most bloodkin ever managed to be. That was my reward. I never told you enough, but I love you, Jordan. You were my Sunday joy, my everyday hope. Jordan sat back in her chair, tears falling freely. In that quiet room, he felt both broken and whole. She hadn't just loved him, she had kept that. Love, year after year, in ink and paper, waiting for a day when he'd be ready to see it fully. And now he did. Weeks passed. The weight of Evelyn's absence had settled into the corners of the house like dust, silent, constant, and impossible to ignore. But Jordan wasn't one to leave things untouched. Not when he knew what Evelyn would have wanted. He could have sold the house. He could have left it behind like so many memories of his youth he'd tried to outrun. But instead, he chose to honor it. Not just as a structure, but as a sanctuary. With help from a few old friends, some volunteers, and the small inheritance Evelyn left, Jordan began making changes. He cleared out the second-floor bedrooms, added new mattresses and shelves. He repainted the walls in warm tones, sage, soft blues, creams that caught the afternoon light just right. He filled the kitchen cabinets with pots and pans and stocked the pantry the way Evelyn used to, always ready for someone to feel at home. Outside, the garden bloomed again, the same one they used to tend together, only now it would be maintained by hands that needed healing too. Jordan registered the house as a transitional home for teens aging out of foster care. Evelyn's place, he named it. Simple, quiet, honest. The opening day wasn't grand, just a few chairs on the porch, lemonade on a folding table, and a welcome sign painted by a local artist. The first 2 residents would arrive the following week, but today it was about legacy. Jordan had sent Clara a brief invitation, not out of obligation, but in the spirit of closure. He didn't expect her to come, but she did. She arrived in a gray cardigan, hair pulled back, her eyes searching as she stepped onto the porch. The tightness in her posture had softened. No bravado, no smirk, just quiet presence. Jordan greeted her with a simple nod. No handshake, no forced pleasantries. Inside, she walked the familiar room slowly, as if seeing them through someone else's memory. In the living room, above the mantel, hung a framed photo. Evelyn seated in her garden, chair smiling gently with Jordan beside her. His arm wasn't around her, but their closeness didn't need touch. It was in their eyes. Clara stood in front of it, hands clasped. She said nothing. Neither did Jordan. But in that still moment, a different kind of understanding passed between them. Not the kind that fixes the past, but the kind that releases it. The house had always held stories. Now it held purpose. And Evelyn's voice, though silent, could still be felt in every blooming petal, every quiet footstep across the worn floors, every young person who would one day call this place their own. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden haze over the backyard. The garden, once weary and overgrown, now pulsed with life. Lavender, tomatoes, a stubborn row of daisies pushing their way through the earth like they had something to prove. Jordan stood near the wooden fence, hose in hand, gently watering the flower beds he and Evelyn once tended together. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows and a smudge of soil marked the side of his cheek. He didn't notice it. He didn't care. Behind him, the laughter of teenagers echoed from the house. Soft footsteps upstairs, the distant clatter of someone learning to cook in the kitchen, music leaking faintly through a cracked window. "Mr. Jordan," a girl called from the porch. "We're out of lemonade." He smiled and waved her off. "Check the second shelf in the fridge. Evelyn always kept a spare." And just like that, her name slipped into conversation, not as grief, but as guidance. Jordan looked up at the sky for a moment, eyes squinting against the fading light. His heart felt full, not loud and bursting, but steady, warm, whole.